What if Sukuna fought Gojo in Yuji's body? Would he be able to win in their eventual face-off, or would he lose in the face of Gojo's overwhelming strength? Well, one thing's for sure, and that is that Megumi would be dead and Gojo would win, or would he? Before we dive into the actual fight, we first have to figure out how this would happen in the first place. You see, back when the sorcerers thought that everything was about to go as planned, Megumi, Hana, and Yuji Itadori finally met Megumi's sister, Tsumiki. But things weren't going well at all, as someone was actually possessing the body of Megumi's sister. It was in fact Yorozu, a sorcerer from the past, and she was reincarnated in her body. Megumi was stunned, and as Yuji and Hana were chasing Yorozu, Sukuna took control of Yuji's body and knocked Hana out. But why did Sukuna come out at this moment? Well, it was because he finally saw a hole through the binding vow. He was able to split his soul and embed a part of it into his finger. Before Megumi could react, he fed him that finger and took over his body, meaning that Megumi was his target this entire time. This makes sense, right? I mean, even way back in season 1, Sukuna always thought of Megumi as interesting, and in the Shibuya arc, he even saved Megumi from being killed by Mahoraga. Also, let's explain why Sukuna was even able to transfer his soul to Megumi in the first place. You see, Sukuna is technically a cursed object at this point, and he can transfer his soul via his fingers. Another thing is Yuji and Sukuna's binding vow was an exchange where Sukuna would heal his body, but the King of Curses would have full control over Yuji's body for 1 whole minute when he said the word enchain. Additional conditions include Sukuna not killing anyone while he's controlling Yuji's body via the binding vow, while Yuji will forget about the vow and their conversation entirely. Sukuna was able to bypass these conditions because Yuji forgot to include himself in the people that Sukuna shouldn't hurt or kill. That's why Sukuna was able to rip off a finger embedded with a part of his soul and make Megumi forcefully eat it. But what if Yuji did include himself in the binding vow? What would happen? In actuality, we really haven't seen someone break a binding vow in the series. Even Kenjaku warned Mahito not to break it because no one knew what would happen. It would most likely be that the one who broke the binding vow will die or face a fate worse than death. So if Yuji included himself and Sukuna decided to gamble like in the original series, well, the series would have ended there and we would all have gotten a happy ending. But what if Yuji did include himself, but Sukuna knew about this? Well, this is where things would get really interesting because there would be a ton of plot points that would change. So let's discuss them a bit. First things first, Sukuna would still not be able to hurt anyone when he chants enchain. But if Sukuna takes control of his body without using the binding vow, he can still kill anyone he pleases, meaning that he and Gojo can still fight. This already happened back in the manga when Sukuna fought and killed Jogo and was responsible for a lot of civilian deaths. So how would this fight even happen? Well, it would all come down to Sukuna breaking Yuji's will, much like what he did to Megumi. In the original series, he killed Yorozu, which in turn killed Tsumiki, which pushed him farther into despair. What Sukuna could do in this scenario is that while he is unable to kill anyone, he can let someone else do the dirty work, and his primary target would again be Megumi, Yuji's only surviving close friend. Sukuna wouldn't be interested in possessing him anymore, since he has no other way to transfer his soul into Megumi's body. This event would most likely happen when Megumi was fighting against Haruta Shigemo. Sukuna wouldn't intervene, which would result in both Haruta and Megumi's death. That, along with losing Nobara and Nanami, witnessing Todo lose his arm and his curse technique, and feeling responsible for the massive death toll at Shibuya, would make Yuji lose all hope and shake his will. And for the sake of the story, let's say it actually did. Yuji just gave up at this point because he lost almost everyone that was close to him. This would give Sukuna the opening he so desired and would let him take over Yuji's body completely without even resorting to the binding vow, which would nullify its conditions. The rest of the events would more or less have the same results, except for a few butte. That's a story for another what if. This time, we'll skip past those parts and go directly to the time Gojo has been unsealed. That was a lot of buildup, and now the time we've all been waiting for is finally here. Just like in the original timeline, both of them decide to duke it down on December 24th. All eyes are on them, and while you might think that Yuji would just suddenly take over his body, at this point, Sukuna is almost at his full power, and there's a low chance that would happen. The battle starts, and Gojo fires his iconic Hollow Purple, and it is further amplified by Gakuganji and Utaihime's curse techniques. Still, Sukuna is able to survive, and hand-to-hand combat between the two starts. Each of them throws everything they have, but Sukuna doesn't have Megumi's 10 Shadows technique. So how will he do? Well, he's actually doing decent. In the original timeline, he wasn't using the 10 Shadows technique that much, and was only keeping it because of Mahoraga. Mahoraga was his trump card, and it was the only way he could physically hurt Gojo aside from his domain expansion, like when Mahoraga was able to cut off Gojo's arm. In this scenario, Sukuna would most likely stick to domain amplification and his domain expansion. Both of them would use their domain expansions at the same time, and a battle between who has the strongest will win. Both of their domains would be evenly matched, but there's one thing that gave Sukuna the advantage, and that's because his domain expansion is borderless, and it can attack anything within a certain range, while Unlimited Void has a border. Another thing to consider is that the barrier of a domain is weak on the outside, and since Sukuna's domain's attacks aren't limited by a border, he can essentially attack the outside of Gojo's domain, effectively winning the domain battle and land a hit on Gojo Satoru. Luckily, as we all know, Gojo is already a master at reverse curse technique, and even if he's barraged by slashes, he cannot die as long as his head stays intact. So how does Gojo deal with this predicament? Well, even if Gojo wants to move out of the domain's range, he can't as long as Sukuna is close by. This is because Sukuna is the center of the domain and not the shrine itself. But knowing that he's Gojo Satoru, the genius, the prodigy, and the strongest sorcerer of their time, he won't lose. He finds a way to push Sukuna back and enter the outside of his domain. What happens next would still most likely follow their actions in the original timeline. Gojo would challenge Sukuna to another domain battle. This time, the outside of his barrier is stronger than ever. They both go at it, and Sukuna does a 1000 IQ move. He turned off his sure hit effect inside Gojo's domain. But how did he do this? Well, this was through another binding vow where he sacrificed the sure hit effect in order to increase the power of his domain expansion outside Gojo's domain's barrier, defeating Gojo in a domain battle once more. After using Falling Blossom Emotion, a technique that automatically repels anything you can touch, Gojo uses his domain expansion for the third time. But at this moment, his barrier is as small as a ball. Finally, Sukuna's domain is cancelled, but so is Gojo's. They again try another domain battle and they duke it out inside once more. Gojo manages to damage Sukuna to the point where his domain was broken, and Sukuna is now feeling the effects of Unlimited Void. Now, this is where things get really interesting. You see, just as Gojo was about to deal the killing blow, Mahoraga appeared and stopped him right in his tracks. However, Sukuna doesn't have the 10 Shadows technique, so Gojo hits him right in the lungs, heart, and liver. But there's one change in the story, and what is it? Well, as the dust settles, Sukuna shows his trump card. He transforms into his original body through the means of incarnation, just like what Yorozu did. The body that had 2 faces, 2 mouths, and 4 arms. This was the body he used to totally destroy Kashimo in just 2 chapters, and we still don't know his full power when in this form. So how would the story go now? Well, the thing is, Sukuna still has no idea how to bypass infinity. The only reason why he was able to defeat Gojo was not because of Mahoraga or the other Shikigami, but it was that he observed how Mahoraga was able to adapt to infinity. Megumi and the 10 Shadows technique was the key in order for him to defeat Gojo, and without it, Sukuna seems to be at a total disadvantage. In the original timeline, after he had finally grasped the concept of Mahoraga's ability to bypass Gojo's infinity, he was able to develop the slash that cut the world and slashed Gojo half crosswise. This was the exact slash that was able to cut Gojo's arm, because its target wasn't Gojo himself, but existence itself. So as long as Gojo existed within this space and world, he would be affected by the attack. Without this model, Sukuna would never be able to perform it because he said it so himself. Without this overpowered attack, will Sukuna be able to defeat Gojo Satoru? Well, the fight goes on and they go back and forth. They activate their domains, but Gojo does the same thing over and over again, as he's able to not only heal himself, himself, but replenish his cursed energy using reverse curse technique. Sukuna would most likely also use the fire attack that completely obliterated Jogo, trying to take Satoru Gojo by surprise. This would work and deal some serious damage, but again, Gojo would just find the right timing and activate his reverse curse technique all over again. Seemingly at a disadvantage, we all know Sukuna is still hiding something from us. In this battle, with this form, he will use it as his final trump card. It may be a curse technique we have never seen before, but that's the only thing. We've never seen it before, and we don't even know if Sukuna is still hiding some of his abilities. With all of that taken into consideration, I have to say that Gojo might just win this one. In the original timeline, even with two seemingly monstrous Shikigami, Sukuna was losing to Gojo, and he was lucky that he was able to pull off that almost impossible slash. But with Yuji's body, he's most likely going to lose in a battle of attrition. This means that Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer of their time, will defeat the King of Curses, no matter the cost. Even if it meant Yuji would die, as he knows Yuji was ready for this the whole time, he will become the strongest being to ever exist, and will set his sights on Kenjaku to end things once and for all. That's it for What If Sukuna Fought Gojo in Yuji's Body. But before you go, why not check out the What If Kokushibo Didn't Become a Demon? What are you waiting for? Click it!